All right, welcome to the September 29th, 2020 Club Cubase Google Hangout. I'm going to do a quick audio test on my end and make sure everything is coming through okay. And we'll get started here in just a couple of minutes. We're going to give some time for people logging in. Okay, so it sounds like the audio is coming through just as expected. My name is Greg Undo. I'm the host for the Hangout today. I work for Yamaha Corporation of America, which is the U.S. distributor of, sorry for my noisy mic stand, the U.S. distributor of Steinberg products, and I serve as kind of a product specialist. So we will go through and try to answer as many questions as we possibly can. You can email questions in advance to clubcubase@steinberg.de or just enter your questions in the chat field. We'll try to get through as many questions as possible in chronological order. If you're watching this live, please feel free to go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us where you're from. If you are watching the replay, you may want to just simply skip ahead till about 10 minutes after everyone gets logged in, and we'll get started then. We will try to go through all the questions in chronological order. The questions will come in faster than I have the ability to answer. So during certain parts of the Hangout, I may be 20 to 30 minutes, sometimes 45 minutes to an hour behind, depending on the number of questions. So I'll try to catch up, and we have some people that are usually incredibly helpful. We have Agent K, who does some moderation for us when necessary. Also, other users. Jazz Dude comes to my mind as being incredibly helpful with kind of helping people until I could get there if it's kind of an immediate pressing need. And so we appreciate the other people kind of chiming in. So, even though I may not get to your question, asking your question repeatedly in the chat field just kind of slows down the whole process. So if we could try to avoid that. Also, depending on which version of the program that you are currently using, you may want to indicate I'm using Cubase Pro 10.5, I'm using Cubase Elements 8, or whatever specific version you have that may make a difference in what platform, whether it's Mac or Windows, that you're running it on. Sometimes that information can be really helpful. So let's go ahead and we'll see who's on a Hangout in just a minute. Like many people during our COVID-19 era, my family is at home. So you may hear my wife upstairs. She's working directly above me, so you may hear her in a conference call or walking on top of my ceiling. So I apologize for any inconveniences I may have to put on the show for my son towards the end of the Hangout as well. But we'll try to keep those to a minimum. So let's go ahead and see who is on the Hangout. So we see Ted Springman. Okay, so he's from Sherman Oaks. All right, so we see Ace from Texas. Okay, so we see Robbie Bowling from Dallas. All right, and occasionally my chat field will jump ahead and I'll lose my place. Okay, so we have Jay from Connecticut. Okay, let's see who else is on. So we have JV Smith from Myrtle Beach. We have Jeff from Chico, California. All right, so we have Sweden checking in. We have Matt from Fort Wayne, Helsinki. We have John from Kenosha. Okay, so we have Columbia. All right, so we have Washington. I'm not sure if that's Washington State or Washington, D.C. I'm just outside of DC area in Alexandria, Virginia. That's where I'm presenting from, United States. All right, so we see Taylor from Pine Grove. All right, so we have Tenerife. Always heard wonderful things about that. Okay, so we see Lucas made it. All right, so we have Kingston, New York. Okay, so we have Neil from Greencastle, Pennsylvania, Finland. All right, so we have Charles. We have Pablo from Galicia, Spain. We have Jan. We have Iran. We have Poland. All right, so we have the Netherlands. All right, so we have Pablo Vasquez. He asked me to say his name. All right, good to see Pablo. Okay, so we have Brahms Groove, UK. We have India. Okay, we'll wait just a couple minutes. Maybe 2 or 3 minutes. We'll get started. We'll get some more people logged in. All right, so we have Alex from Italy. All right. So I see my pronunciation for Pablo's name was perfecto. My middle school and high school Spanish didn't fail me. I'll have to thank Mrs. Ingman. All right, and also if this is your first Hangout, let us know as well. All right, so we have some more people getting logged in. And again, we'll get started here in just a moment. All right, so we also see Claudio from Lisbon, Portugal. Seems like all my friends want to go to Portugal now for holiday. Okay, so we see JazzMac 36251, first time here. Been using the older videos as a reference. Super useful. Glad it's been useful. All right, and feel free to go ahead and start asking questions. Okay, so we also see Lucas, his first live hangout. Welcome. All right, so we have Jason from York in the UK. All right, maybe another 30 seconds or so, some more people getting logged in, and then we'll go ahead and get started. I just saw an email from famous composer Alan Silvestri just come across my desk, so I'll virtually name drop. So, incredible composer. Okay, so let's go ahead and I'll scroll up and we will get started. We see that Ted Springman, after swearing off a certain coffee shop in Seattle, is going back. All right. From previous Hangout discussions. So a question from Ted. Do you think Cubase developers or celebrity end users, such as Greg Lukens or noted composers, would consent to phone into a Hangout to briefly opine on their favorite aspect of the program? We've thought about doing something like that, but it might be a different format than a Hangouts. And I may have to spend some time getting it kind of technically set up for having another person, but it's something that we're kind of currently in the discussions of doing. So, look for that in the next couple months, maybe 4 to 6 weeks, I think. Okay, so we have a question I'd like to see, or suggestion I'd like to see a new track class introduced wherein user production notes are synchronized to display as the playhead hits markers that encapsulate each individual statement. So I know a lot of people that, will use markers for some of these aspects. And I know sometimes the marker notes can sometimes only go a bit horizontally. So as we add in different markers here, so I'll just drop a couple markers in. So as we kind of come here, we could go to the marker description, and we could say, so as we kind of go to look at the markers, you could see the text. So you could say, this is a demo, but, beyond, it's not like a paragraph. But I was thinking recently it might be nice to be able to kind of fill this whole space, and you could click here to expand upon a marker. But there are a lot of people that will do that in that way at a particular time. I've seen people do that for lyrics in a song, so they could just navigate to particular lyrics quickly, so they could just kind of keep this open, and the singer goes, oh, go to that phrase where I said this, and then you could just come here and just say, oh, okay, it's this phrase or that phrase. But I think that, might make sense to expand that as well. So thanks for the suggestion. Okay, so we have a question. The behind-the-scenes video for Zimmer's Dunkirk seems to suggest a giant tempo map was assembled before a note was written. So is it a standard practice for film cues to begin as a silent tempo map? I think it could depend upon the project. I know a lot of composers, kind of watching them work, may watch a cue and they may just kind of tap to get like a feel for the tempo. So they may just kind of like while watching a particular cue, I've seen some of my friends just open up the beat calculator and they just kind of click on the tap tempo and they're watching and they just hit the space bar. And as they do that, they may start off with that particular tempo and then kind of modify, but they kind of, a lot of them may watch a scene and just, when they feel kind of, what they think a tempo should be for music, they may kind of start with that and then modify and tweak as necessary. A lot of, I think, listening to some of the interviews and some discussions with hands I've had on doing, Christopher Nolan projects, there's always kind of a theme of time. So, you'll hear like a stopwatch or someone's, I think they've actually recorded Christopher Nolan's watch as part of the soundtrack and, doing different elements of that. So I think it may be more attuned to maybe Christopher Nolan films that do that. But, I haven't seen hands already kind of start from scratch on a project, but I see most people just kind of watching it and maybe just kind of tapping along when they see a cue, and then kind of building the tempo from there. But whatever works for you, if it gets you to the finish line, it's all good. Okay, so from Ace, hi Greg, hope you and your family are doing well. We are doing great. Thank you for asking. Could you please give me some tips on how to mix down a project to export as loud as possible without distorting? So if we want to do a mix down, you could come, let's say I'll just do a quick export. I'll do just a bit of a section. So you could kind of watch your meters here as you're going along. And, just kind of check out like your master and make sure that that's not clipping. Especially as like things get bigger, maybe in a chorus. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of export. A lot of people will run it through different processors. So if you come here and we could go directly to the channel strip and just, if we wanted to run, a maximizer, we could turn on and off like, maximizers directly in the channel view. So if you wanted to do that, or, just run it as a insert, probably post fader, and you could just go to your dynamics and just say, okay, I wanted to run it through a maximizer here or limiter. So let's say if I just wanted to export just a little bit of a file, and I'll get just a little bit before the chorus, and I wanted to export this, another trick that you could do is just kind of normalize the mixdown file. A lot of people will do that. So they'll do their audio mixdown, and at this point, I'm going to have it create an audio track. So we'll just do our stereo out. Okay, and I'll take off cycle markers. So we'll just export a small region for time's sake. Okay, so this is our mixdown file. So if we wanted to listen to it, so I'll just solo this, and so sometimes you may go, oh, I could still get more out of it, and getting more out of it sometimes doesn't help the music. But another thing you could do is to just select the file, and if you go to audio to normalize. Under processes, you could just come here and you could say, I want the peak normalization at, and you could do it in loudness units or in dB. So let's say I want it to be at -3. So I will just come there, hit enter, and now that will automatically apply directly to that file. So let's say if I want it to be, -12 dB. So you can see that the amplitude of the particular file. So let's say I want to, go to -1 dB. When we watch the file here. So if I play this file back, so let's say I'm there, and now I want it to be to -1 dB. So if I want to, then my Cubase didn't like that, so bear with me just a second. So, you could just simply normalize it and kind of get the maximum loudness kind of at that point. So those are a couple of things to do. You could kind of do some different master effects processing, or just use some different processes, like normalizing offline. And sometimes, some of the best things you could do for making mixes loud that a lot of people don't think of is kind of musical arrangements can make a big change. So sometimes people want to do more with having, like quick, run it through this, or, use this particular plugin. But really, sometimes all you need, sometimes a really well-arranged piece can sound louder. Okay, so we have a question. Does Cubase contain anything that will produce a hold freeze effect to loop delays or reverb tails for background pads? Or should I manually create some using sampler tracks? So you could probably do this. Just do a new project here, and I'll just do kind of a pad sound. I would check out the like the multi-tap delay could probably be really good for this. So I will just open up like a quick pad sound. So let me just come over here to Pad Shop. Because here you could have kind of cascaded delays on delays. So let's see if this is. Let me just check my audio connections quickly. Sorry about that. All right, let me just. All right, so let's say I just have. All right, so let's say if I wanted to do something like you're describing, so I have kind of a pad sound, I will just as an insert, and you can do this as a send as well, obviously, but check out some of the multi-tap delays. So when I hit a note here. Because here what you could do is you could have different delays within delays within delays. And then you could have different and I'll just try with maybe instrument sound. Maybe you could hear a little more clearly initially. So let's say I'll just load up. A little bit of a keyboard just so you can. Okay, so I'll just put this on the right MIDI channel. So now if I wanted to, I will just, and I'll just run quickly as an audio insert, some of the multi-tap delay stuff. And then, you could use this for pads very effectively. So let's just... So when you get to like the different taps here, what's great about this is you could say, okay, I want to go to my tap effects. And for each tap, I could then add like a reverb on top of the tap. So I could just say... So if I wanted to do something like that for this pad sound... I'll just... So I can do a little pitch bend up. And again, for each of the taps, you could have different amount of reverb. So let's say instead of now, I'll add the reverb here. And for each tap, we could have a different amount of the reverb size. And let's say I'll take the overdrive out. So you could kind of play around with the multi-tap delay, and I think that could get you kind of the sound that you're looking for. Okay, so I have from JazzMac 36251, Greg, audio video export question. I want to export stems for a video project, but I also need to export the video from my session for reference. I did stem export, then video, same location. They don't align. So make sure a lot of times when we're doing like the video export, so I'm not sure if there's any, if they don't align. So I'm not sure if the audio is kind of not aligning with the video as it was before, but generally like a lot of those things I would check to make sure that you have the same exact frame rate for the video. So the best thing to do is once you open up the project is to click on get frame rate from video. I don't have a video in this project because if it's going to be like, if you have it set to 30 frames a second, which I think is, or 25 frames a second, which I think is the default, that, and you're exporting it at, into video is at 2997 or 30 frames a second, that could cause the alignment to be off. So make sure first thing you do is actually just choose get frame rate from video and make sure that that is aligned. But I haven't really come across that. Only time I've come across that is when the frame rates don't match of the project. So that's a quick way. Just if you go to the project setup, you can do that from the project menu to project setup or Shift plus S, and just click on get frame rate from video and make sure that those are aligned. Question 2. It's very common for a mix to have many stereo and mono tracks during mix down, batch export. Why does Cubase not detect automatically and export accordingly? Why do we have to do it manually? It takes a lot of time searching and selecting mono tracks and then selecting mono export mode. So one thing you do, we can think of the export. If you're passing it on to someone and it's a mono file, if it's going out of a stereo output, that stereo out, and you have panning, it would need to export a stereo file to have that sound the same way as before. So one thing that you could do to kind of, make this process easier is, see if I may have. Okay, so I think in this project I put a stereo and a mono track together here. So my drum loop is in stereo and the bass is in mono. So what you could do is go to your VST connections, hit F4. Sorry, I got a new keyboard, so I'm going to be one function key off all day. And on outputs, we want to have a stereo out defined. And then you could just add a mono bus. You don't even have to have it connected anywhere. And before you go to export, take all the mono channels, and you can do this in the mix console pretty easily. Take all the mono channels out mono, your stereo files out stereo. So you don't have to do them separately. And now when I want to do a batch export, I will go to my file to export audio mixdown. And I'll just choose these two files. Okay. And I'm going to insert into create audio tracks into projects. So I'll say export the audio files. Sorry, let me just get my range set up. Sorry. Okay, so I get my left and right locators configured. So file, export, audio mixdown. And as we do this, we're going to see our stereo track. I guess I had that set up incorrectly, but that's really all you have to do is just route your mono tracks to a mono out and your stereo track. And then when you do kind of your normal audio mixdown file, that's really all you'd have to do. I'll just do one more quick test. We'll just create audio track again. So that's how you could do like stereo and mono simultaneously. So just do that. I know it could be kind of a drag, but if it's kind of based upon the actual, output of where the channel is going. And if you have panning and effects and stuff like that, that's kind of why it's done that way. So I always kind of have a mono output just in my connections, just for cases like that. Okay, so good to see Robbie Bowling on Hangout. So he says, hi, Greg. Jay from Connecticut with a birthday wish for Steinberg. Please create a Linux version of VST Performer so that anyone can be added, supported, produced on any platform, even low-cost Linux boxes. Being that you could kind of do it on an iPad or a phone or any Mac or PC, it seems pretty open. So I haven't heard of any discussions for a Linux version of VST Performer. I'm not saying it's not going to happen, but, it's probably not the highest priority. But I will kind of pass that along, but, we also don't support Chromebooks, and at what point it's hard to kind of draw that line, and there's not a lot of mainstream. Linux is very popular, but I think obviously the Mac, PC, and iOS are more popular for that. But I'll pass the suggestion along. Okay, so we have a question from Jeff. Hi, Greg. Would you best developers ever consider allowing JPEGs in the Notes tab of the mixer? Sometimes I want to add a snapshot of something in the notes. So it's not necessarily, we could add snapshots, but it's not in the note field. You know, we kind of have the notes as text, but when we come over here, let's say to our large mixer, you could go to kind of the setup and see pictures. And here you could just double click and you could add pictures, but you could also add user pictures. So any picture that you have, you could say, okay, I just want that bass to be like a Fender Precision bass, and you could have that picture that's associated directly with the project that's independent of the notes. So while it's not in the notepad, you can have your own pictures. I've seen people that will take pictures of outboard compressors and EQs with all of their settings and be able to, use that for recall purposes. So it's not in the notepad, but there is the ability already, just in case you weren't aware, to add pictures, and these pictures can be user generated. And you could also see them kind of as you're doing this. So if you wanted to see, snare drum or how a guitar amp was mic'd, you could just add the pictures. Okay. All right, going through some introductions. Okay, so a question, why does my true peak on the loudness meter read differently than the peak on my master bus? So let's go ahead and take a listen. So for another question that's coming up, I just recorded kind of a test tone. So I'll just turn the volume down, but let's say I have a test tone playing here. So let's go ahead and you can see kind of the meters here. Will be fairly aligned. Now, something that it could also be that people run into, it could be your panning loss. If you go to the project setup, if you notice that it's like 3 dB or 6 dB off, you could make sure that try adjusting your panning law and see if that makes a difference. I think Gareth, who's on Hangouts a lot, he had a very similar question. And he just found it was the panning law, which is basically saying that, when you double an instrument, like, from right to left, if you have two channels, if you have a channel and let's say you double that channel, it's going to be, it could be 3 dB louder. So twice the volume of that. So it sounds like it might be a panning law. So go to your project setup from the project menu or hit Shift plus S and try adjusting the stereo pan law settings and see if that kind of resolves it for you. Okay, so we have a question from Charles. Hey, Greg, I'm thinking of changing to Nuendo. I work in movies. What's the main difference? And I'd like to keep Cubase. All the best from LA, Charles. So Nuendo has they're currently basically at feature parity between Nuendo and Cubase. So you could still have all the Cubase functionality, but Nuendo adds more capabilities for more advanced media production. So it's going to add specific tools for automatic dialogue replacement, ADR functionality for game audio connect. It will allow you to interact in a very slick way with Audio Kinetics Wise, work with Perforce for so that you could have project synchronicity between multiple people. It's going to have Dolby Atmos. It's going to have network collaboration. Some more extensive surround sound support. There are some additional plugins that it will come with, like a randomizer for doing sound design. There's going to be kind of a whole slew of very, advanced audio post-production. So, if you purchase Nuendo, you could do that and keep your Cubase license separate, or, but if you have Nuendo, you could also have the Cubase functionality inside of Nuendo. So a couple of things to think about. So those are some of the main differences. Okay. Okay, just going through, we're still in introductions. All right, so we have John, who's checked in from Lithuania. Sir Robert from Atlanta, good to see you in a hangout. Longtime Steinberg advocate there. All right, so I just see a question. Hi, is there a supervisor for the chat tech support that I can contact? They have been rude and consistently disconnect on me. So if you could let me know like what country you're in, that would be helpful, because each country or different countries will have different support people. And I know some of them in different countries. Like I'm based in the U.S., so I know who our U.S. person is. But if you're in Canada or Holland, that's not the correct person to put you in touch with. So if you want to send me an email at clubcubase@steinberg.de, I may be able to direct you to the correct person. All right, so we have Vinay from India checking in. Thanks for joining us. All right, so a question from Pablo. Greg, why do I have spikes in disk performance sometimes? I'm using an SSD for Cubase projects. Maybe a mechanical one is better. Generally, SSDs have much higher performance and are, significantly faster than a spinning drive. So it could be, if you're having some disk issues, if you're running a lot of virtual instruments, you may have to, open up like different virtual instruments to actually, use more preload of the memory. So a lot of times when we go to, let's say, like maybe like a Hallian Sonic SE, depending on your instruments, you may have settings where you can see your maximum preload. So if you have, and this is pretty conservative setting. So this will be, 1.2 gigs of memory for all the instruments. So it's going to load up a portion of the instruments and stream the rest of it from the hard disk. So you may want to increase that. Another first thing to try is going to, or maybe not another first thing, it's kind of contradictory. If you go to your VST audio system and select your audio interface and try raising the buffers, and this could be expressed in milliseconds or buffer size, every audio interface will have a slightly different terminology, but the same concept, and try raising the buffers and see if that makes a difference. Also, if you're loading lots of virtual instruments, increase, the preload amount on the instrument. If it's all audio, also you could check, to do some basic drive maintenance like defrag. But I think, one of those options will help you out with that. But you should be in great shape with your SSD. All right. And again, it's just seeing people checking in with their first live hangout. So we're glad to have you on the hangout live for the first time. Okay. All right, my chat field jumped. All right, just finding my finding where I was at. Okay, so here we are from Andrea. Hello, great question. I imported a 44.1 kilohertz audio track on a project that was set to 48K, Cubase Pro 10.5. Didn't warn me the difference. I didn't notice either. The track sounded pitched up. What can I do to get a notification when importing a track? And what do I do now that the track is embedded in the project? Thank you. So if we go to preference, and one of those preferences, it's a dialog box that kind of pops up, and I think it has a "Don't show me this in the future" kind of message that most people turn off. But I think if we go to editing to audio, you could just say on import audio files that you could just come right over here and say open options dialog, or you could have it may be set to use settings. So if you do this, you could copy the files immediately to the project folder, but you could also convert to the project settings, and this would include the sample rate and bit depth. So go to editing to audio, and just make sure that you could say use settings by default, and just make sure that this is checked. And that should, when you're importing an audio file of a different sample rate than the project, it will convert it to the file. If you have a different file sample rate, I believe you could just go to your pool window, select your audio file here, and right click and just choose convert files. And at this point, you'll see the sample rate, bit depth, channels, file format. So you could just change the sample rate there, and that should get it aligned directly to the correct sample rate for your project. Okay. Okay, so we have a question. Can you use the control room trick for reference, but using the headphone channel? That is to say that it behaves the same as if you do not have the headphones channel. All right, so if we wanted to have like a reference track, sorry, just have some more emails coming in. Okay. So you could listen to the reference track. So the question is, like one of the little tricks that I've shared with a lot of people is to send like a reference track to an alternate cue mix. And what you could do is, and when you send it to a different headphone mix, that it actually will allow you to, so we could listen to your different cue mix. It doesn't get processed through the master fader. So at this point, if you have effects that are on here and you're comparing it to an already mastered project, it wouldn't go through this particular path. So I think I'm just going to reread the question, make sure. So, on the headphone channel, the concept here is that you could monitor quickly using, so if you have headphones plugged in and you don't want to disturb maybe the audio that's going out of the session, you could just listen to the different headphone mixes, and you could just click on the mix here as well. So you could use the phone's channel. So the mix would be whatever your mix is, and wherever the reference file that's being routed to the cue mix, that you would just select that. So it looks like you could just be able to navigate between those with the phone's channel. Okay, so we have a question from Ross. Question, I got a mono track and want to add an insert to create a stereo effect. I normally create a stereo group and send it there. Is there an easier way? So, if you have a mono file, so let's say I'll just take this bass part for now, and it's mono as we listen to it. I'll just open up a different project here quickly so we could. To streamline this process where you have, let's say, just a mono file and you want to have a stereo effect. So say I want to add a stereo delay. Just go to Descends, right click in Descends, and you want to say, add effects to send to. So let's say I want this to be a stereo delay. And now I'll just go. So this way you could have your stereo effect, like my delay or my reverb. So just instead of using an insert, just come right here, right click, add effects channel. And then, so if I wanted to come here, let's say maybe, I think we have an auto panner that we could activate. So now when I do this, I'll turn it on, and as we play, we'll just. You were out of tune. Whatever you did, that was okay. Up until now, so that was okay. So that's really all you had to do to have, stereo effects on a mono source is, just use sends, and that way you could have all of your stereo effects as being routed, and you could have all your inserts there as well, as that would follow the channel configuration. Okay, so I had a question. Can you talk about gain staging and VST renders, like Guitar Rig 5 being so sensitive to input source levels, then adding plugins and gain staging through all the phases? So you just kind of want to watch, all, throughout the entire signal path. So I think I have like a track that has guitar modeling plugins on it. So we'll take a look at it here. Let's see if it's in my recent list. Nope, don't see it. So just open that up. So one thing to make sure of, a lot of time if you're using a guitar model, you're probably connecting maybe the guitar directly into a audio interface, is make sure that you have, if there's a high Z switch, make sure that high Z switch is engaged, and that way, it will actually, have the guitar at the right impedance level to start with. Because if you plug your guitar into a line level source, it may not be the best application for that. So, and that could be starting you off on the wrong path. So I know like our UR interfaces, usually one of the inputs will have just a front, like a high Z switch on the front. So when I look at like these guitar parts here, these will both be this track. These both will be going through our different guitar amp modeling. So we say, okay. And sometimes when you listen to the actual guitar that was recorded, it's slightly less than inspiring. So that's the direct guitar signal. And but sometimes when you look at these, you can see that like in this recording, it's kind of very low level amplitude. So a lot of people try to get too much gain initially and then run it through guitar modeling. But, a lot of the models, when they're modeling the amp, they're also trying to model the gain structure of the instrument going in. So a lot of times you don't have a really hot level coming in from a guitar. So kind of be cognizant and be aware of that. That, a lot of times people want to print such a loud level, but in context, you may not want that because the guitar amp's input and a real guitar amp's input may not be, expecting a level that hot and that clean. So that's kind of what the amplifiers that are often modeled are emulating. So that's something where I see a lot of people go wrong. I haven't worked with Guitar Rig 5 in, 15 years or, whenever Guitar Rig was first introduced. So I don't know about any peculiarities with that, but, that's kind of the big thing where I see a lot of people going wrong with different gain staging for guitar stuff. Okay. Okay, so a question. Hello, Greg. Is it possible to assign a keyboard shortcut to switch A/B settings when opening a plugin? Seems to be impossible. Let's take a quick look. All right, so I'll just quickly add an audio track here. Okay, so it looks like there's a toggle A/B settings under Edit. So let's give that a shot. Okay, so I'm going to assign a key command to that. So all right, I'll check my key command again. So it doesn't look like that key command is working for the plugin. Let's see if I could maybe access it through quick controls. So it looks like I have that assigned correctly, but doesn't look like it's responding to that particular key. I'll just see if there's any other ones that have an AB. So it looks like maybe that's for a particular editing function. So I don't know a way of doing it with a keyboard shortcut, but I could play around with it some more if you want to email me. Okay, so you see question, I tried extracting pitch bend MIDI data to an automation track for Bézier's curves, but it didn't work. Is it not pitch bend? So let's go ahead and let me see if I think I have some vocals in here that we could probably use.
Control, hit the road.
Okay, so I'll just do a quick Variaudio. Okay, so now let's say I have a MIDI track and I see the pitch bend data here. So if I wanted to, we'll select our pitch bend. So I think when it might do it to, let me see if I extract that maybe to an existing instrument track. Okay, so let's, okay, let's see if I have, I was going to put it to the project clipboard. And then if it's going to, let's say a virtual instrument track, I think if I come here, okay, so let's say I have this and there's my pitch bend data that when I go to automation, I think if you come over here and go to channel 1 pitch bend, let me undo that. All right, so I'm going to just go to my MIDI here, and depending how you have this also set up, you say CC automation setup. So that's our pitch bend information. So you can, draw in pitch bend here within your MIDI and do your Bezier curves. But, it's, and let me just see if I look at some of the other automatable parameters, if it shows up in there. So, but you can edit the pitch bend. But it kind of, because MIDI pitch bend isn't a CC message, it's a MIDI system common message. But you could see kind of the pitch bend that's indicated there, and sometimes being able to convert that. I'll play around with it a little more, but I know I've kind of transferred it over. But I think sometimes if you do it to a MIDI track versus an instrument track, it could make a difference as well. Okay, so question for Carlos. Hi, great question. After using tempo detection tool of an audio file, how can I reduce those many different points in a single tempo? So if you have, if you want it to be like a steady single tempo of a file, you could use one little feature. So if we have a file that doesn't have so without a steady click, what we could do is I'm going to, select a file. We do our project tempo. We do our project to tempo detection. All right, and then I close that. So if we have our tempo detection going on here, and let's say I needed to, so what you could do is go to audio, to advanced, and choose set definition from tempo. Hit OK. And that's basically going to embed the tempo changes into the particular audio file. So as we listen to it now, I could turn off the tempo changes. And it's just going to play back at a perfectly steady tempo. So just make sure if you want it to be one steady tempo after a tempo detection, just go to advanced, set definition from tempo. That's going to embed the tempo changes of every single file into the audio file as metadata, and then you just turn off the tempo track and type in whatever tempo you want, and it will follow. Okay, so we have a question from Lucas, who I think is his first time on a Hangout. How do you do a time signature change? So if we have a project, here we have a time signature. So I'll just start off with a new project. So I will add a signature track as well as my tempo track. And these two will be kind of separate. So if you have your tempo turned on here, let's say we're at 120 beats a minute. And if I wanted to change that initially to, let's say, 100 beats a minute, and let's say a measure 13, I'm going to go to measure 13 here. We will zoom in and say, okay, I just want this measure to be 3/4. So I'm just going to say 3-4. And I want a tempo change there. I want this to be 4/4 and go back to our tempo. So that's kind of really all you have to do. So if we listen to this with, let's say, our click turned on, so we're in 3/4. Then we're going to speed up a little bit, go back to 4/4. So just kind of come over to the signature track, and you could, select the draw tool or the pencil, and then you could enter in various meters directly there. So say you want 7/8 for a couple measures, and you want 5, 4. You could have all your different meters and tempo changes. So when you adjust the meter, that's going to be independent of the tempo. So they're two separate entities, but you could adjust them at the same time. Okay, so we see from John Costigan. Hi, Greg. Any pointers on combining two song files, making one song using two different instances of Contact, two of Battery 4, or any multiple instruments, Groove Agent, Halion Sonic SE? Okay, so so if we have, different song files, one easy way of doing this, let's say I'm in, just jump back to one of my other projects here quickly. So let's say I'm in this song and I wanted to add or combine. I'm not sure if you wanted to combine, like just import like a different song. So if I come here, I could just say, let's import tracks from project. So I'll just choose this one because it's not so over the top. So I'll hit open. I can select all the files here. And then as we've done that, it's just now added all of those tracks, and we could choose to, I'll undo that, and we'll do this one more time. So say I'll import tracks from project, and I think we could set our definition of where they go. So I'm going to say we could do events, and I'll say insert at cursor position. I'll select all. So now all my all my files will go to, and these are just kind of offset in the original project. So I have this project and that project. And if you needed to run, multiple instances of various plugins, you could do that, quite easily. But, to combine, two different song files, just try the import tracks from project. And I think that will help you with that. But if I'm misunderstanding John, just let me know. All right, so a question. Can Greg explain the difference with insert and send effects and how to configure send effects? Question 2, when to use inserts and send effects respectively. So, when we want to, we could think of two different ways of being able to work. So we're going to have inserts and send effects. an insert effect is dedicated to a particular channel. So if I'm on this bass track and I wanted to have a bass amp on this particular bass track, I'll come over here to my VST bass amp. Now this isn't going to be able, this bass amp isn't going to be able to be accessed, that particular plugin and its settings are going to be dedicated to this particular track. If I add an effects channel track with a send, and I could do this in a couple different ways. One is just to add an effects track. And let's say, okay, I wanted this to be reverb. So I will, and I'll just go to my reverb here. Let's go to, let's say, Revelation. So now when I have this effect send, I could take all of these tracks and send it to a particular, to this one reverb. So I'll come here and say, okay, I wanted all of these particular drums. I'll just select them here. And now I want it to have these drums. I'm just going to hold down Alt and Shift, and we want to send these to the reverb and turn it on. So a send effect, when we select a particular effect here, we go to the sends, we'll have kind of a balance. So when the send is all the way to the left, this will be, that there's basically no effect, none of this sound being sent to the reverb to that particular plugin. So we could have, if we wanted to have more reverb, I could take this particular channel and move that send all the way to the right. And this blends the balance between the dry signal and the affected signal being sent to the reverb. So why do people, use send effects? Because instead of having, and I see, and I've mentioned this on Hangouts before, where I see a lot of projects where people are running 16 different insert effects that are all the same reverb. And that takes a lot of your computer's processing power. But when we use a send, and they'll have the same settings on each one. But when I use a send, I could send all of these channels to that reverb, but it's going to one single reverb. So at that point, your tracks can sound more cohesive if they all are in the same room. At times you may want, different rooms for a particular effect. So think of the insert as being dedicated for that particular channel, and a send effect, multiple tracks can be sent to that destination or to that plugin. And we could vary the level of dry versus wet by adjusting the slider here. So you may want to have less reverb for the kick, because that could sound a little out of control on the low end and be very kind of mushy. But I may want more of that reverb on the snare to make it kind of pop in the mix. So multiple tracks being sent to one plugin in varying levels between the dry and wet when blending that effect into the signal, the audio signal of the track itself. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so question: when I drop waves into Cubase, the pitch and speed changes. How can I correct this? So that kind of sounds like a classic sample rate mismatch. So just like we showed earlier with the prior question, I think from Andrea, if you go to your preferences and go to editing audio, just on import audio files, make sure you could have it set to use settings or to open options dialog box, but you want to make sure that it's converting to the same sample rate. If you're dropping files in, let's say you have a lot of loops and most of the loops are going to be at 48K. And if your project's at 96 or 192K, it may sound like it's playing at 1/2 or 1/4 of the speed. So with that preference set, and again, just editing to audio, you could choose to use settings, have it automatically convert to the sample rate of the project. Now, if you want to change the project's sample rate, you could go to the project menu to project setup or hit Shift plus S. And here you could change the sample rate of the project, the bit depth, what audio file format for recording, etc. So usually if something is coming in, it sounds like it's the wrong pitch. It's kind of a first thing I would think of is a sample rate mismatch. All right, so I see Michael Teams from Weatherford, Texas. Good to have you on a Hangout. I believe it's Michael's birthday today. So everyone wish Michael a happy birthday. That's what I saw on Facebook this morning. So happy birthday, Michael, and thanks for joining us. Okay, so I see, hi, Greg. How to consolidate a track or a region on Cubase 10. Thanks from Burlington, Vermont. So let's say if I have a bunch of edits, so I will come here. So there's kind of different terms for consolidation, but we'll see if this is the right one. So let's say, so I don't destroy my project here. So let's say if I have like spaces between tracks, kind of like so. So first off, I'm going to just be extra safe with this. Okay, so let's say I have audio files that, look like this, and I want to make it consolidated. To make this all one nice, happy audio file. So I'll just make sure. So if I wanted to do this, I could select these particular files. I'm going to go to audio and I'll just choose bounce selection, and then I could just replace event. And now what was, a number of distinct audio files is now rendered as one complete contiguous audio file, depending on how long you select the events for. So if I misunderstood, if you wanted to consolidate in another way, just let me know. All right, so we good to see JVI on the Hangout. Okay, just reading through questions. Okay, so question, when I make a group track and configure the sends, when I mute the group track, why don't those group tracks get muted? So let's go ahead. And I'm just going to quickly revert this project. So I'll just load up another project where I could do a quick group. Okay, this one will work well. All right, so let's say I want to take all my drums and have them being sent to a group. So I see all my drum tracks here. And I'll just kind of raise their volume a little bit. So if I just come here and add a group track, so I'm going to make a stereo group, and we'll call it our drum bus 1. And I go to all of these tracks, and I'll just select these. And I'll just quickly send all of them to my group. All right, so say these are all now going to my drum bus. And now when I mute, all right, the question is, why is it we still hearing the drums? Because the drums are all still, I'll show it in the big mixer. The drums, the routing is still all going to the stereo output. So it's going via a send to the drum bus. So when I mute, so now these are now all being sent to the bus, but these are all going kind of parallel, almost in the parallel path to the master fader here. So if I wanted to get rid of this channel, and if I wanted to be able to mute those particular tracks that are feeding into the group, so I'm going to say remove the group track. I can now select all of the tracks. And then I'm going to add a track, and I'm going to say group channel to selected channels. So I'm going to make it stereo group. And as we go here, now when I mute, the group mutes all the sources. So what's the difference? So when we added our group, and we look at it in our large mix console, now the main output for the tracks is being sent to this group and not this stereo output. So if you're sending these tracks to the stereo out and then in the send routing it to the group, muting the group, you still hear these audio tracks that are feeding the group. You mute the audio, the sound of the group, but these are still routed to the main outputs in the mix console. So, but routing, when you select all the tracks and add and say, add a group channel, to those. So when you just say, add a group channel to the selected tracks, its output routing here is sent to the group as opposed to the stereo out. So that's why you still hear it when you mute it when you're using sends as opposed to kind of a direct connection. So hope that makes sense. So question from Charles, can you tell me if Cubase 10.5 has render in place? If not, what's the best way to put your instrument tracks to audio in Cubase? So if you have, let's say I just have a quick MIDI track and all right, there's my 21st century drum beat. But to get to the render in place, all you have to do is go to edit and render in place. And you have different render settings where you can have it dry, include inserts, EQs, and channel strips, include descends, EQs, inserts, channel strip, and master effects. And so that's all you have to do, and just choose render, and that will automatically just render the audio file. And one of the processes I chose was to mute the MIDI tracks. You could also, if you have the actual track selected, just to disable it. So that's all you had to do. So again, go to edit to render in place. Okay, so question, Greg, I use Hallion Sonic on most projects. Some projects I add effects within Hallion Sonic. Others I use the mix console exclusively. Which is the best practice? You could do either, and it's really, whatever is needed for the particular situation. So if you have, let's say a third-party reverb plugin and you want the Rhodes patch to have the same reverb as the vocal in the project, that's when you could use multiple outputs. And to do that within Hallion Sonic SE, if you're not familiar, but you have, pretty sophisticated mixing and plugins here. So you can say, okay, I just wanted to have, different effects and EQs. So, you have a number of, mixing options available directly inside of the plugin. So you can say, well, I want to come here to my sends. And you may notice that when you go to, the delay, that you have a multi-delay that's very similar to the delay that's built in. You'll have Reverence for convolution reverb. So a lot of these are the same basic plugin settings. But if you needed to actually send this particular track to a different output for further processing, you could just go to the output here. But it's really, there's no right or wrong way to do it. It's if you can get by, and if all you need is the internal effects inside of Hallion Sonic, that's great. If you needed it to use with third-party plugins or other plugins that you're using in your project, just send it to an output here, and that will allow you to kind of access those particular settings within the mix console. So you could EQ it independently, have different, inserts, different send effects, or have access to the particular send effects as well. Okay. Okay. So it's a follow-up question that JazzMac had. So Greg, with the audio video export from earlier, frame rate, etc. matched, there was an extra time at the beginning of the video track. For some reason, it was possible to align them by hand, luckily. So I would check, I want to say, I think that one of the video editors is kind of pretty notorious for adding, I'm not sure which program it was, but I think one of the video editors has a reputation of adding like an extra frame when it's exporting the video file. So, check to see if it does it with every video that you run into, if it's only with, maybe particular videos from one from the same source, and see like if you just get a video from YouTube, if that has the same, if you have the same results. But it could be like, the codec that was used when exporting or, encoding the video as well. Okay, just reading through comments. All right, I see kind of looks like a question in an Asian language. So I'm sorry, I don't read that language. I'm the dumb American who only speaks a little bit of English. So if there's a translation that you could ask, or if there's anyone else that could read the particular question, I'd be happy to answer and show if I could just perhaps get a translation for my benefit. Sorry. Okay, so I see a question. I made some tracks on GarageBand. Can I transfer them to Cubase to record my vocals? I'm not sure how sophisticated, I've never really worked with GarageBand, but how sophisticated the exporting capabilities are. I'm sure that you can take all the instrumental parts and export it as a stereo mix and record your vocals in Cubase. So I'm pretty sure that you'll be able to do that, but I'm not sure if GarageBand would have kind of a like a batch export to make stems of everything. So. Okay. So, question from JVI. Is there a MIDI bus? Basically, I play an external piano on its own speakers, and I record it on a MIDI track that has no out. After recording, I want to send the MIDI out to a MIDI bus. For the MIDI bus, I could select which piano I want to hear, the external instrument or virtual instrument. Example, the Grand or synth and Hallian. In short, I want to be able to send a MIDI track to a MIDI bus, and there I can select which instrument I hear from the original MIDI file. Apologies, I had to split the question up, 200 characters in YouTube. So, so if you record any source, as long as it has a MIDI communication. So if it's coming from a keyboard or not, I could add an instrument. So let's say if I come here, I add an instrument track. All right. And so let's say I have... Okay, and let's say I wanted to add a MIDI track. So I'm going to have this create a MIDI track. Okay, so now... So if I want to record from, any MIDI device, whether it's a keyboard or not, and it's a MIDI track or a virtual instrument track, all you have to do is just arm. And at this point, I'll just solo this because... Sorry, just solo these two. So as I play in, I have both record enabled. And then, so I will just hit record now, and so, any MIDI device that's hooked up, whether it's a keyboard that, has speakers, anything, as long as it transmit MIDI, it's just going to be captured in through, so as long as it has, either a USB interface or a 5-pin DIN that's connected to a MIDI interface, it's just going to be captured directly in. So, and if you want to hear the external instrument, all you have to do is to make sure that that MIDI interface is being sent out. So, and that would be with a MIDI track as opposed to, so instrument tracks are just going to be for internal instruments. But at this point, we could say, okay, instead of sending this MIDI track out to Pad Shop, I could send this MIDI track out to my Nectar to my keyboard, and it will play the sounds of that particular keyboard itself. Now, if you need and that's going to, send MIDI to your keyboard, that will generate the sounds. And you could have the audio outputs go through the internal speakers if your keyboard has that, which I believe you indicated it did. Or it could go, the audio output from the keyboard can be sent to a mixer. Or if you have an audio interface with more than stereo input, we could choose to, if you have Cubase Pro, you could go to external instruments and just connect, let's say like your montage is connected into inputs 3 and 4, and then you could run that as an external instrument. So you can, capture, MIDI from any device and send it out to any MIDI device, but an instrument track, you wouldn't necessarily be able to go out to your keyboard, that would have to be a MIDI track. So I hope that makes sense. If not, just let me know in the comments. All right, so we have Alan checking in from New Jersey. Great to be on a Hangout. Okay, so just see a comment. I should study how to make custom Cubase track icons. So I'm sure if you have any graphic image editing capabilities, or you could just, there's this thing called Internet with lots of pictures you could use as well. So, okay, so seeing our comment on consolidating wave tracks. So I think we covered that already. So I think Agent K may be trying to do some translation for us. Okay, so we have Captenergy Music checking in. Hello from Pennsylvania. Good to see you on a Hangout. All right. Okay, just going back, my chat field jumped, so give me a second. Find where we were. Okay, so I think I'm close. All right. All right, so good to see Gareth on the Hangout. I see Cine Filet. First time live here. You have a great voice, Gio. Thanks. I just talk. I can get my son to sleep reading him Harry Potter at night, so soothes him to sleep. Okay. Question, Greg. How would you simply set up and save a sampled instrument and use it as an instrument? Thanks. So let's say I go to my media and I just wanted to find a loop. Or let's say I have this Hallian Sonic file here. So I'll just render this in place. Okay, so I have a sampler track. So I'm just going to drag this file if I do it correctly this time. So I'll take this particular file, drag it into, I guess I didn't even really have to do that, because one of the great things with the sampler track is that you could come over here and just drag an actual audio file over, or just drag a part that's going to a virtual instrument, and it'll just automatically kind of render that file for you. But you could also just kind of right click here. Let's say this is my new sampler track. I want it to come here. Okay, so I will just make sure that only the sampler track is. So now that I have this particular, just solo the sampler track. And I want this to start right there. We have these 3 notes close together. So now as I play, you could give it a preset name if you want. We'll just call this September 29. And then, that's going to be available as kind of like a track preset. So, all you'd have to do is load a track preset and say, so I'll just do a new sampler track. And so now that I've done that, I'll just add a brand new sampler track. And I'll just say, let's load track preset and say September 29th, hit OK. And that's really all you have to do is just simply, just load, and then you could play that instrument like. Okay, so you see Jazz Dudes added a link with track icons and packs in the Discord, so that's great. Okay, so I see just a comment of please also display Japanese subtitles. So I think, we don't necessarily, when we're doing the Hangouts, it just does the subtitles, I believe, in English automatically. So I'm not sure if for the live, I think for a normal published video that's not a Hangout, that you can have, different languages translated. But a live video maybe treat it a little bit differently, but that's kind of all done automatically by YouTube. So, but I could do some more research in that, but it's not like I'm turning off other languages or anything like that. Okay, so I'm just seeing kind of a follow-up clarification from Pablo. It says, I didn't say, Greg, forgive me, I was referring to this about his disc question. I was referring to the disc, the performance of the disc. It is very occasionally, and I don't have VSTI open. So, so see how many tracks you have going. If you're on Windows, it can't ever hurt to try to defragment your hard drive, especially if you've done like a zillion files with it, like lots of recordings and erasing files, that can't hurt as well. And if it's a laptop, make sure it has kind of like full power. If it's an external drive, sometimes, I see a lot of people that have like an SSD that's connected externally over USB 3, and sometimes the USB has like, special eco modes for power saving, and sometimes those things can cause issues. Okay, so we have a question, another further clarification about the pictures. Thanks, Greg, about the pics again, as in taking a pic of my lyric book and pasting it in notes. So if it's specifically with lyrics, what I do for lyrics, and I think I have it in this example here, I just go to my project notepad. So you can have a notepad for every single instrument here. So you could just say, okay, this is the lead vocal. Andrew, we use a U87 with no pop filter. So you could have notes on individual tracks. But I often have just a project notepad as well. And in my project notepad, I will keep just a lot of different information, such as, okay, here's a song, it's written by, it's in the key and the tempo, the copyright information. And I generally have the lyrics directly inside of the notepad so that, as people are making changes to the lyrics, that way the lyrics are kind of associated with the particular, when you pass on the Cubase project to someone else, there's kind of a documentation of the lyrics, that travel with the project. So maybe instead of taking a picture, if it's just for like the lyric book, if it's just for lyrics, this is something that I do a lot in my projects. and just, having the lyrics in there, and you could cut, copy, paste from like a Word doc and just, have those directly in your system. So if that works for you, Jeff, that's something else. Pablo is also mentioning about his hard drive. Says it seems strange to me because I use Thunderbolt and I have a fairly large buffer. So yeah, it's pretty atypical. I'd say for you to kind of have a Thunderbolt drive that you should be, not having a lot of performance issues. We usually, like a lot of people often for audio drives don't even bother to get an SSD and just have a really large spinning disk because, unless you're doing, 400 tracks or something like that, you may not need an SSD for playing back audio files, but it can, speed up virtual instruments and large sample libraries really significantly. All right, so I see another further clarification about VST Performer for Linux. So, all right, thanks for that, Jay. Okay, reading through comments. Okay. Okay, so we see a nice comment from Byron, Crystal Coast, North Carolina, checking in. Really appreciate all your work here. I listen to every Hangout in their entirety, even if it isn't live. Thank you. My mind has been blown away with new ideas. That's great. Okay, good to see Nick on a Hangout. I know Nick had sent me a kind of an email reminder about checking the iPad, so I should be borrowing my friend's iPad tomorrow so I could test out for the IC Pro. So hopefully tomorrow I should have an answer for you, Nick. I'll try to send you a message. Okay. So I'm seeing some more comments about the please display Japanese subtitles. So I think Agent K mentioned please watch the replay tomorrow. There will be the option to choose captions. I'm not sure if that's in other languages, but maybe if someone else knows for sure, because I think mine's all localized for United States. Okay, so we have a question from Neil. Hi there. Any idea why when I set up my project time for 5 minutes, for example, it somehow changes itself to ridiculous time, like 2 hours? Happens all the time. Maybe I did something wrong. Maybe happens as well when I import a tempo track if the track is 4 minutes long. Thanks for the help. So I haven't really seen the project. I haven't looked closely to see if my project duration is changing. I think the default value is 10 minutes. I usually leave it at that. So I'm not sure what would cause that to change. It could be a tempo track that might cause that. But if you have a particular project that you see it happening to, or if it's with everything, let me know. A lot of times, when we had to go beyond the project, or I've seen some stuff. I remember working with Eric Johnson's engineer, the first album they're using their Nuendo for, and they had tempo track. Or when they're editing automation, and it would go down to the sample. They couldn't get this was like as much as they could zoom in, and like they couldn't get down to near the engineer, I think his name was Richard at the time. He couldn't get down to the sample level, and he was just like, why is this driving me crazy? I can't really edit the audio. And I looked into his project duration. It was set for 24 hours or something. So that's usually when I have to when I get a question like that, they can't zoom in. That's often when I go to the project duration, but I haven't really seen it be change like that. Mine's always, I don't check it frequently, but mine's always kind of been consistent at about 10 minutes. So, but if you have a project that it's changing on, just let me know. And if you want to send me a download link, I'd be happy to check it out. Okay. Question: is it allowed to ask 2 questions in one and the same Hangout? So you can ask as many questions as you want in a Hangout. So we'll try to get them all in 4 hours. But yeah, so you could definitely ask as many questions. So Jan, second question: how to input sound from YouTube or Spotify to Cubase, Windows 10, or is it easier to connect another laptop or mobile? When I'm in a hurry, I know there's a lot of people that will get different like audio utilities. I think on Windows, a popular one is Voice Meter, and this may allow you to kind of route internally. So Soundflower on Mac, which will allow you to do some like software routing. When I'm doing it, I often, by the time I try to figure out all the routing options and to get like the Windows drivers working with the ASIO drivers being used by Cubase, that I end up just plugging in a cable and recording the audio that way. Sometimes, there are some utilities if you wanted to extract the audio where you could type in a YouTube page. This probably won't work for Spotify, but you could type in a YouTube page, type the URL in a website, and it could create an MP3 file for you. There's one that works pretty well. There's a lot of them that will install Flash to make it work, and you get inundated with ads, and it's like everything you don't want to install on your computer gets shared. It's like, here, we're going to change your search engine in your web browser. So kind of every bad shareware trick imaginable. But so I would check like VoiceStream or SoundFlow on Mac, or VoiceStream on Windows, and see if that works. But don't be afraid to just hook up a cable as well. Sometimes you could spend hours doing it, and it's like, okay, I could just hook up a cable in 10 seconds and be recording. Okay, so we have a question: can you show how to use the compressor? All right, I'll just jump back to this project. So, what compressors are really designed to do is to kind of, regulate dynamics control. So I will just take all of my drums and run it through a compressor here. So let's say, select all my drums. I'm going to do this via a group. So first thing I'll do, I'll just kind of bring up the volume of my drums here a little bit. Then I'm going to right click and add a effects group channel to the selected channels. So we have this going on. So I take my drums, and let's say I want to kind of squash the dynamics a bit. So I could go to my channel strip, and we'll just do kind of a standard compressor. So I will just go ahead and solo just the drums. So now what I want to do is just kind of, you'll see kind of the peaks. So it's like super squashed, super compressed. So as soon as the audio gets to this signal, it controls the dynamics. So the soft parts like that cymbal that we just heard. So we'll go ahead and just listen to that cymbal crash again. So while it's pretty soft, you could hear that kind of being brought up by the compression. And you hear the attack. So this is what no compression sounds like. So kind of the full dynamics. And then you could have kind of how much, once you set the threshold here, how much compression. So you can see kind of the level here in the kickback meters within the plugin. And then you have attack, which is how fast that it's going to come in. So maybe a vocal, you may want a really fast attack and maybe kind of a slow release. You could also have like an auto release. So let's say if I just wanted to bypass the compressor now. So being able to just kind of come here and so that's a quick overview on kind of how to use compressors. So, people use it on vocals, so you don't have to do lots and lots of automation, tiny volume changes. You could let the compressor kind of take care of that for you. You could use it on bass, whatever you want. So. Okay, so I just saw, and this is kind of in reference to a question from the last Hangout. I think Michael Teams was having problems with his, I think it was an Arturia version of an ARP 2600 plugin where the arpeggios were going out of sync. And when I was doing the Hangout, kind of revisiting, when I was doing the index for the last Hangout where we discussed this, one other thing kind of came into my mind as the arpeggios, you said they were drifting. So if you have a MIDI part, and let's say you just have, a chord here. I'll just switch this to bars meets. So let's say if you have a chord, and you're playing along, make sure that the start, even though like you may look at it and go, oh, okay, those are all like tight. But if those notes have different start positions ever so slightly, that will make the arpeggios over time kind of drift out of sync with each other. So, one easy way to kind of fix that is just to say, okay, I want to set my quantized value to like whole notes. And I just want to make sure that when I select the beginning of the notes, that they're all coming in right on the beat, and all together. Because if they're ever so slightly off, and if you hold the chord down that's arpeggiating, over time, if the notes were input slightly differently, the arpeggios get out of sync. It may not be so apparent at first, but over 8 bars, 16 bars, 32 bars, it would become pretty obvious. So check that, Michael, and see if that makes any sense. Okay. Okay, reading through comments. Okay, good to see Vinny Sabatino on a Hangout from Orlando. Okay, so we have a question from Lucas. Hi, Greg. Hope yours doing well. Hope you're doing well. I am. Thanks for asking. I have a question, please. When I generate harmony voices of a vocal track, I can't move the harmony vocals in Variaudio. It snaps to the place. Is it normal? All right, so let me open up a project where I have this kind of set up for. Okay, there's one little trick to be aware of with this. Okay, so I'm going to quickly generate my chord track from the piano part. And now, so I want to select this particular phrase and generate harmonies of that. So I'll go to my audio menu and say generate harmony voices. We'll give it 4 voices. Hit OK. I'll just bring their volumes down ever so slightly. Okay, so now that it's generated the harmony and we double click on it and we want to see it in the Variaudio editor. So I will just go to we'll activate Variaudio. So now that we have this, so we'll listen to, and I'm going to change the color options based on chord track. So now when I try to move a pitch, it will just kind of automatically jump back to where it was. So I think what we want to do is in the track editor, if we choose chords, we could just say for it to not follow the chord track, basically, is what we want to do. So now when I choose off and we go back to our Variaudio editor, so I'll just double click here, go to Variaudio. Now you can move it wherever you want. But again, select the track that it's on. And for follow, you just want to notes around. All right, so you see Michael likes his likes seeing the time signature track. That's his new thing he learned. Okay. All right, so I see a question about the exporting audio from Ace. So we did cover that a little earlier, so no worries. All right, and if you've learned a couple of new tips or tricks, make sure that you subscribe to the channel and also that you hit the thumbs up button. So okay, so I'm just seeing comment from Pablo. Select source channel of the control room. This option for the headphone channel, there is none, or I cannot find it, so I can only switch with the mouse in headphones for reference. Okay, so if you want it for the phone's channel to toggle back and forth with a keyboard shortcut, it seems. So let's see if we get a keyboard shortcut to toggle between the mix and our C1. So there may not be a command for that, but we'll take a look and see if we can find one. All right, so let me see if this... All right, so let me see if this keyboard shortcut that I had... Sorry, just got a new kind of dual platform keyboard for Mac and PC. So I'm not sure if there's going to be a keyboard shortcut for that. I know we have the keyboard shortcut to kind of switch between these. So let me see if I can maybe create one. I'll try new. Yeah, I don't see a keyboard shortcut. I'll take one more glance through it, but there may not be one for doing it in the phones. Yeah, just the phone's channel on off. So sorry about that, Pablo. Okay, let's go read through some more comments and questions. Thanks for all the great questions. Okay, so I just see a question, and I'm not sure if it's a question or a comment maybe, but it's just direct routing and summing mode with 3 question marks. So let's take a look at that. Excuse me. All right, so let's say if I come... I'll activate this project. That will help. All right, so this is kind of a interesting feature within Cubase Pro, the direct routing. So I can see that I have everything kind of compressed on this particular bus. But if I wanted to send it to another bus, what we could do is I'm just going to add a bus here. So let's add a group channel. Okay, so now I have here, I'm just going to delete that. I'll put them right next to each other. So okay, so now if I wanted these to go to 2 different destinations, and I wanted to combine these, I could use something with direct routing. So make sure that when you go to your racks that you have direct routing enabled. So let's say I want all of my drums to go out to the to the stereo bus. So I'm going to select the drums here. And we're going to send them all to the stereo output. So the drums are not going into the groups. So I go to my sends. And I want to take these selected channels and let's route them all to group 1. And on send 2, I want them all to go to group 2 as well. So, sorry, let me just turn that to no bus and to no bus. All right, so what I'm going to do now is on my direct routing, all right, so we have kind of the direct routing summing mode on. Okay, so I have my direct routing here. So what I'm going to do is instead of using my aux sends, which are often used for effects, I'm going to say, we're going to send these to group 1 and to group 2. So let me select all of these and I'll hold down Alt and Option. So we'll say group 1 and we'll send these to group 2. So the default mode in racks is for direct, when you see this little icon here for direct routing summing mode is unchecked. So I could send it to my different groups here. But so right now, I'm going to send these all again to stereo out. All right, and if I wanted to combine these two sources, this is when we have the direct routing mode enabled. So I can say now send these to group 1 and group 2. So this way I could have one of the tracks unprocessed. So let's say, okay, so we have that unprocessed. I'll just add just a tiny bit of gain here. And this one I could blend in kind of the heavily compressed signal and kind of do parallel paths. But if the direct routing summing mode is unchecked, it only gets sent to one destination here. So at this point, so that way you could combine the different stems that you have located here. So if the direct routing summing mode, so if you're sending it to multiple destinations, you could easily set up parallel processing using that. Okay, so just reading through comments. So I see lots of people wishing Michael a happy birthday. And we see it's Jay's birthday tomorrow. Happy birthday in advance. See, I got compared to being the Bob Ross of audio by Agent K, so that's an honor. Okay, okay, so I see another question about to generate voices, so we covered that already. All right. Okay, so a question from Acme Brand. Firewire interface has up to 4,000 plus buffer size versus USB 1024. Will Firewire be better for older, slower machine for performance? Reverbs are starting to create crackling on my dual 3.6 gigahertz Xeon computer. So it really could depend on, like the buffer sizes available could really depend on what the interface is. So some can go to like really high buffers. So let me just take a look at what. So even though my interface is USB, if I go to control panel, I could still go to 2048. So it's, if you see like a limitation on how high the buffers could be, that's really kind of not determined by whether it's a Firewire, USB, or Thunderbolt, but by the driver design. So, can you get, will it be helpful for other reverbs? At some point it's not going to be the buffers that will hinder the computer performance, but it could just be your CPU. So so it could be different for, every system. But if you're running a lot of heavy reverbs, you may start to, get some crackling as the algorithms get faster, more intense, as, in software development. I think a lot of companies have gotten to the point where, you can only really write for, develop algorithms practically that could be run on, the vast majority of computers. If you come up with a great reverb plugin, but no one can run it, it doesn't do anyone any good. So as reverbs and as computers get faster and more capable and can process more information, then the software developers can kind of tap into that pool of resources. So, so plugins from 20 years ago can run, very lean and mean compared to what we have now, but probably the sound quality of the more contemporary plugins is better as a result. So there's always kind of that balance. So, but so depending on your audio interface, so USB, like you saw my USB interface could go up to 2048, but I don't think the format of communication to the computer is a factor in why, what the highest buffer that can be utilized with the audio interface, but how that particular audio interface driver has been designed. Okay, so I see a question. Who do I tag if I have a question? So if you have a question, you can just enter it in the comments field and we'll try to get to it. All right, this is Agent K just kind of helping out people. Thank you. Okay, so you see sub 403 in Hangout. All right, so we have a question from Diminished. So a question regarding MIDI recording. Right now, if I'm recording all MIDI clips will overlap, including automation. Could you have a proper MIDI recording workflow where and how everything will receive its own track lane and how punch in and punch out works? So it sounds like you could probably solve a lot of these with just doing just a little bit of some of the MIDI recording options that maybe aren't so apparent. So let's take a look. Okay, so if I want to come over here to just like a little bit of a piano. So let's say if I, can't play keyboards well and I'm just recording something here, I'll just turn on click track. All right, and let's say I want to, record another part on top of that. So if I come here, all right, so I will hit record this time. All right, now there's different record modes that you could set up in the lower left-hand corner. So that merged the two events. So when I double click here, I'll see the bass notes that I played in conjunction with the chords that I played in the first time. I believe by default, if I that it may be set to new parts. So if it's set to the record mode for MIDI to new parts, and I hit record, so when I hit play, this is going to be a part that's overlapping the part underneath it. So I could move this as kind of a separate entity. So we see the part that was there and this part that kind of resides on top of that. So when you go to your MIDI record modes, and you could do it from the transport or the transport panel, or you could actually just pick and choose your MIDI record modes. So you could just say you want it to be new parts, to merge, or to replace. So if I hit replace and then record, so I just can... So now the other parts have just kind of disappeared. So make sure that you have kind of your, and there's, different modes for cycle recording, same concepts, where if you're in cycle, where you can do stacked parts. So let's say if I wanted to just cycle 2 measures, so I record different pass. So now we could click on lanes, and each of the passes has been kind of recorded into its own individual part there. So just check out your... and that also kind of ties into automation as well. So let's say if I'm out of cycle record, and now if I record MIDI information, so let's say I record my MIDI part here. And at this point, I want to record my mod wheel. So if it's on set to new parts, the modulation wheel kind of gets put directly on top. And I had that set to lane. So here I have one part that is just my modulation that's on top of that. So I think probably the mode that most people want to work with is going to be merge. So that's where I have set to kind of my personal default. So I think hopefully that makes sense, but try some of your MIDI recording modes, and I think you'll be able to do exactly what you want. All right, so I see Interesting comment from Gareth. Dear Greg Ross, how do I create fluffy little clouds in Cubase? I remember one time I got to hang out with Sidney Harmon's son, and he got a copy of Cubase, and I got to go to his house and play with his son for a while. And his son would just do all sorts of great, he was probably like, 9 years old or so, but he would just grab kind of the paintbrush here and just kind of draw in, this is his composition. He would just do this and play it back and see what it sounded like. So that was his Cubase art. So, but his dad was Sidney Harmon, who, owned Harman Kardon, including, JBL and Lexicon and Crown and Soundcraft, all the companies. Really fascinating man. So glad I got a chance to meet Sidney Harmon. All right. But that's how you could do some Cubase clouds, and you could change the colors if you want. So we have a question. Is there any way to curate the plugin list so that it favors VST3 over VST2 when certain plugins exist in both formats? So the best way to do this is if you go to your studio, to your VST plugin manager, and here you'll see like which ones are VST2, which ones are VST3. And, at this point you could... I will always suggest kind of like creating a new plugin manager and maybe copy the current collection. So let's say this is copy, so all of your plugins will be available. And then you could just select the plugin here when you say, oh, I have VST2 and VST3. And at that point, just come here and just right click on the VST2 version and delete it. So it could really depend on how the plugin is developed, but that's one easy way of being able to do it. So going to the VST plugin manager, looking through your instruments, say, okay, this one's VST3, this one, isn't, this is a VST2, and you could see right there, select the instrument. It'll show up in your list right here, and then just right click to delete it. The VST2 version, if you want. All right, so we see Paul Claridge on Hangout. Good to see you there. I think I helped him with a logical editor question last week. And created his own patterns for Groove Agent SE. It's great. So question, is it possible to slide with notes like in Piano Roll and FL Studio? So, a lot of times when you're depending on the instrument itself, you can, and what the instrument is responding to. I know this will probably be slightly different, but you could do like portamento is the typical MIDI, control for that. So, but not every instrument will support it. But if you just kind of search, I'll just add portamento, and then you could just draw in, CCs to go to portamento like that. But a lot of people want to do like some 808 type glides. And if that's what you want to do, you could do that kind of easily within the sampler track. I know it's a different approach. But depending on the instrument, but there is kind of like in the sampler track, you could put it into kind of like a monophonic mode. So if I just want to come here. So if I hold down a key until the next key starts, and then you could just adjust kind of how fast you want the glide to be or how slow. So if you want it to be like a fast glide, So just hold that down. So that's some of the techniques you'd use to kind of do glides pretty easily. All right, good to see Real Raven on Hangout and Jazz Dude as well. So he's incredibly helpful. Okay, so we have a question, another question from Diminished. Is there a way to disable knobs in the mixing console reacting to the mouse wheel? I always change them by accident. It's driving me insane. If not, what would be a workaround? So if you have, there isn't a way to disable it. And it could be tricky because at what point do you not turn the knob, if you will, so I'll just kind of show a couple of things that you could do. So we get this question a lot where people, it's like, I don't want to be able to mix my faders with, I don't want to use the mouse for this. So if you accidentally are like working on the wrong channel, there is an edit history for the mix console. So if we're in the mixer, let's say we have kind of a large project here. I go to, let's say, inserts. So make sure I have. Okay, so let's say I'm just here and I accidentally automated a particular plugin parameter. I moved a fader, I'm mixing, and then it's like, you actually have kind of your history here. So anything that you've done, let's say I move a fader here and I'm mixing and it's like, why am I not hearing this particular change? I'm panning it. It's not doing what I want. And you realize that you're on the wrong channel. At this point, you could just kind of go through here. And I think it's Alt-Z, Alt or Option Z will allow you to undo. And Alt Option Shift Z is redo. So that's kind of a separate layer within just the mix console. So you could do it from the lower zone mixer just by clicking on these undo, redo commands, or if you're in a full screen mix console, you could just do it kind of right here. And this will be kind of a linear undo history, but that's separate than the undo history for the edits. Okay, in Groove Agent SE, I put my own groove patterns on the pads and saved as preset, but how can I get them to be searchable in the load panel? So let's take a look at that. So if I have, let me just jump over here to Groove Agent SE. Okay, so I'll just load up kind of a quick pattern here. So let's say I wanted to search for other patterns for this. So let's say, so if you, in Groove Agent SE, if you wanted to look for all the patterns, I think you could just click on the little like folder icon here. And then you could go to browser and be able to, so, you know, if you want to go through, I haven't tried this with the user patterns, but if we choose like styles, you know, at this point I could just try different and keep the same kit, but just kind of audition through different styles. And then there's also a browser here, so you could just kind of look for probably your own kits and styles and patterns and be able to load those up. So try to go here and just look, you know, here you could load up different kits, instruments, styles, MIDI files, and also just the full browser. So I would try that, and I think if you go to the browser wherever you saved them to, that you should be able to access them in other projects. So question from Magic Window, is there a way to have the chord track so that certain tracks listening to it only pull specific notes, like only passing a chord note, only a certain note of the chord to the bass line? There is no way to like specifically filter, but if you wanted it to follow root notes, there is one of the voicing options. So say I have my instrument track here and we go to chords. When you go to, so let me just generate a quick chord track. Okay, so now I go to my retro log. We could choose for it to follow. And then within the voicings, let me just, all right. Just do it on another project real quick. Okay, so we have, I'll just put some chords in quickly. Okay, so when you go to chords here, so you can say you want to do chords, but there's going to be single voices, and that will do within a single chord. But if it's like for a bass line, you could just choose for the follow chords to be based on root notes. But either way, you could do kind of single voices, and it's going to follow and give you just a single voice. But for like bass lines, just choose root notes, and that will probably just extract kind of the root note of the chord as been defined. See Michael Teams indicating people should whack the like button, so I'll concur with that. Thank you, Michael. Generous of you on your birthday. All right. Okay, so my chat field jumped on me. Bear with me just a second. Okay, so I just see a question from Mark. Hi, Greg. I hope you're well. I asked about a rendering problem incorrectly. Please let me try again. When I have multiple MIDI files all being sent to Halion 6 on separate MIDI channels, and I try to render a single track, all the other instruments on different channels get rendered as blanks. With this is one of the times if you wanted to kind of solve that problem, because when Cubase is sending information out through, I think, a MIDI track to an instrument that has multiple outputs, it doesn't, because it's being sent as a MIDI track, it will render those other tracks, the other outputs, as being as blank empty files, because Cubase doesn't really know where the MIDI track is sending that information to in the output of that, because it's just a MIDI track. But if it's an instrument track, so if you use Halion as an instrument track, that will kind of stop all of the files and like empty files from being rendered. So try, if you want to work that way, maybe try to try to work in more instrument tracks as opposed to MIDI tracks that are routed to a virtual instrument. Okay, so question, how do I lock MIDI clips to tempo? So, generally MIDI clips will automatically be locked to tempo. So if I come here, so let's say I have an audio file and MIDI information here on this particular project, and I start changing my tempo, you notice that the MIDI is locked to the tempo and the audio is going to vary to the tempo because this audio is not in musical mode. So when I come here, our MIDI is staying perfectly in time. Now, the one way that MIDI won't follow tempo changes is if the MIDI track itself is set to what's called linear mode versus musical mode. And we could do that by default, it's going to be set to musical mode. And this is kind of very typical MIDI sequencing workflow. But when I click on this little music note here on the inspector, the top inspector tab, for this MIDI part, and we click there and it turns it into a clock. This will have this MIDI information play back at that moment in time, regardless of the tempo. So as I change my tempo now that the track itself is set to musical mode, the events are occurring at the same place and it's not following the MIDI tempo changes. But if we have this turned on, now when I adjust the tempo, that's going to automatically, the MIDI, 9 times out of 10 by default will automatically follow and lock to the tempo. Unless you specifically tell it to be in linear mode. Okay, so we have a question. Hi, Greg. Any updates about Cubase 11 release? I'm sure that our development team is working on stuff. And if I kind of knew stuff about it, I couldn't really communicate anything because I'd probably be in perhaps a non-disclosure agreement that I would honor. So I think, I'm sure that whatever they're working on will be exciting and really interesting and fresh. And when it's ready, we'll be here to show it to you. So. Okay, so a question from Diminished. Another question. Sorry, no reason to apologize for asking questions. That's why we do these hangouts. How do I gradually quantize MIDI? And reason, I can select the quantization grid and adjust my recordings in percentage so it's ever so slightly quantized but not 100%. How do I do it? So when you have MIDI data in Cubase here, and you go to the quantize setup, just undo that. So we'll just kind of come right over here to the quantize setup. You have what we call iterative mode, and this is your percentage based quantization. So just go to and once you have this kind of set, it'll be the default mode. So again, you'll see kind of the quantize panel, and you could do this also from the edit menu. So quantize panel, and then make sure that you have this icon activated, and the mode that would put it into iterative quantization. So at this point, you can say, I want it to be quantized, 80% closer to the beat. And then as you quantize, move it another 80% to kind of split the difference. And that's your percentage-based quantized value there. So you could just set that from the quantize panel, leave iterative active, and then that will be the default quantize mode when you hit Q. I see Gareth is indicating that I'm available for voiceover work. So I actually know someone who's a voiceover talent artist, like management. So she does really well for herself. All right. Okay, so just seeing kind of further clarification from JVI about the, so you want to send multiple, this is about sending tracks out to the keyboard. We just reread it again. So, sorry, question wasn't clear. I know sometimes it's hard in 200 characters to get your question. I have a MIDI track that I want to send multiple tracks, external plus internal, to a MIDI bus group idea once it's being sent. I could choose which ones are muted and wet level. So if it's a MIDI track, and I'll just choose this. One of the things that you could do is you'll see, and this isn't on instrument tracks, and I'm not sure why, but you could come directly to this location, and now you could send it to any destination. So this one track can send this out to 4 different destinations. And you could have a different plugin for each one. So if you go to, let's say, our MIDI control, you could say, on this particular one, I wanted to make, send, modulation or volume information. So let's say instead of breath, I wanted to be CC7 for main volume. And you could adjust the amount there. I know some other people will also just take a number of tracks like this, and I'll just put it to no VST instrument. So let's say I have, 6 instruments and I'm making a layer, is just to come here, put all of these into a folder track. So let me just see if I did this right. So take these, and then once you have the folder track, we could call this our MIDI stack. And this could be a combination of MIDI and virtual audio or virtual or VSTs. So I will just toggle this quickly here. So then you could just arm just that one folder, if that makes any sense. And then you could just have nested folders, nested tracks within that one. So you could record So I'm just going to record on this one particular instrument, and let's say, and it's just other nonsense, but I'm just kind of playing. I'll just solo this, and as I play in one MIDI part, it's going to be sent to multiple destinations. So I'm not sure if that will help, Jay, but let me know. Okay, so see, question. Hi, Greg. Is there a way to delete tracks with empty audio events after rendering in place with macro? Okay, so if all the tracks are empty, let's see, you might be able to do this in a Project Logical editor. So let's say, I'm not sure if we get, let's just, okay, so we'll say event is empty, and then we'll just choose delete. So this, if I did it correctly, should, let's hit apply and see. Okay, so it looks like that worked. So I just set up a Project Logical editor. I'll save this as a preset. And there may be a preset already. Yep, delete empty tracks already. So there's a preset for that. So once again, just kind of choose function, delete. Container type is equal to tracks. Property is set to event is empty. And then we'll see all these instrument tracks just be gone as soon as we do that. So you don't even have to make your own preset. You could just use one of the presets that's already available under tracks. Okay, so we have a PB question. I'm sure it's covered somewhere else, but what is the best way to do pitch bend automation? I really don't like the CC way to do it, but it doesn't seem, 10.5 has a natural way of doing it. So I think if we start off with, like, let's say if I add an instrument track, so let's say I have my Hallian Sonic SE, let's see if I find something. All right, so let's say I want to now, I'll just record. All right, and so I've recorded my lovely composition for Gareth to incorporate in his next hit song. And so I will come over here and let's open up the automation. Then I think if you dig under Hallian Sonic SE, slot 1, and then scroll all the way to the bottom that, let me just see if you just type in pitch. Okay, so now this will be the pitch bend automation. So at this point, I will enter it in like traditional automation. So say, so now I play this part back. You see the pitch bend moving. So this way you could do your Bezier curves if you wanted to. So, come over here, and I know it's not the most intuitive way, but just on your VST instrument, open up the automation, go to more, and just into filter, just type in pitch and select it for the MIDI channel you want, and then you could draw it in like standard automation data and have a little more flexibility. Okay, reading through more. Thanks for all the great questions. See how we're doing on time. Okay, we're doing pretty well. Okay, so I just see a question from Sir Robert. Project note page where lyrics will help. Can that be saved with the WAV or MP3 mixdown? I don't think that there's, I don't know of a way of putting, usually you could add some metadata to the file, but I don't know of a way to incorporate something kind of as big as lyrics into it. But you could store it within the project as well. So. Okay, so I see. Hi, Greg. Your Cubase looks colorfully nice. Please show how you changed the default colors, or give me a YouTube link for video that shows how. Thanks. So I really kind of use the default colors. The one thing that I do change, like in my setups, is I make sure that the parts are colorized as well. So if I look at we just jump to another project. So everyone could do this, very easily. I will just, let me find a quick project here. Okay, so I'll just jump to this one. So I kind of get this question a lot. It's like, oh, why does your Cubase look so much better? So there's a couple things that, have been added for, and I'll just revert this quickly. With like 10.5 added the ability to colorize the mix console. But the one little piece of advice that if I could share would be, I like to have, different colors for different parts. So, I try to have drums one color, vocals a color, and bass is kind of bluish to me, as a color. So, but coming over to the preferences, I have I kind of recently went back to this, and I like it for a lot of the projects. Like with the white waveforms. So if I go to event display audio. Here you could say I wanted the waveform brightness, so I could adjust that down to where you could, see the waveform be very dark, or if you want it brighter. So I kind of go back and forth. Like I didn't have white waveforms for a number of years. If you have kind of low level amplitude, you could also have background modulation and have that. So you could kind of see, where more intense audio parts are applied. I usually go to, I think if you go to track and mix console, here, if you uncheck the ability to have kind of the mix console channels, it'll be just kind of very similar colors, and 10.5 added the ability of the colors here for the tracks to be utilized, throughout the mixer. So we could have that, and you could adjust the intensity of that as well. I like to have a preference for used tracks, default color, and I will often just say, use tracks default color, and then or use previous track color, or use previous track color +1. So every time you add a new track, you get your colors included within that particular, a new color will be added there. If you wanted to take your projects also and say, I wanted to split this part. So I'll go to my range and I'll just say, let's say I'll just split under range. So I'll split that. And what I could do now, if I wanted to, is you could colorize, and using the colors, a lot of people, I get this question is like, oh, you have way more colors than I do. I only have 16 colors, it's terrible, but you could, if you hit, I think it's Alt-Shift-S, you could go, and if you wanted to change the colors, you could do that. There's different presets. So you could say, so if you only see 16 colors, you can say, I want to see 8 rows of basic color with, 4 tints, or I want to see, 32 colors. So when I start adding my colors, there's a lot more color options available. And again, that's just Alt or Option plus Shift plus S. So if you wanted to just kind of go back to, where this is kind of the default state, so you could, change those different elements. And you could also just kind of use the color tool, so if we've split a number of events, I could say I want all of these, and I could switch to the color tool, and I say in the middle for the bridge, I want it all to be that color, regardless of what's on the track. So you could do, colors within the parts, or, or like one part could have the verses could be one color, the chorus could be a different color. And if you wanted to colorize multiple tracks here, just select just a track, select your color tool, and I can say I want these all to be kind of green or violet or whatever color you want. So that's how you could kind of some tips on colorizing and getting more use of the colors inside your Cubase project. Okay, reading through comments. Okay, so we have a question from Diminished. He's getting a lot of good questions in. Okay, how do I set the stereo spread width of a stereo track in the mixing console? So if you could just come to one of the plugins as an insert, And under spatial panner, you'll see stereo enhancer. So say if I'm playing this, I want to be very narrow, very mono sounding. And you can do this on every track. You know, this is kind of extreme example. So there's the default. It's kind of more monoizing it. I've got to choose what's mine and what's yours. 'Cause now you're asking Beatles or Stones. Something about it just sounds so wrong. So that's kind of an easy way, just the stereo enhancer plugin. So very effective, works great, sounds really good. Okay, so question, how to set the same output routing for several tracks in the mixer simultaneously. So this is one of the handy things of quick control. So let's say if I want to send all of these tracks here, I'm just going to hold down the, I'll just do it in our project. It's not as mixed MIDI and audio. So, but principle is the same. So you want to hold down Alt or Option plus Shift. And that will enable what's called quick link mode. And quick link mode's incredibly handy. So if I wanted to send all these tracks to, and I'll just get rid of my input channels. So if I wanted to send all of these to the stereo output, I'm just going to hold down Alt or Option plus Shift. And now I'll change one of these. So I want these all to go to the right output. So now they're all going to the same output. I want it to go to group 1. I want them all to go to no bus. I want them all to go to the right mono output. So if I don't hold down or don't have quick link enabled, they would all be done individually, which is great if you get paid by the hour. But if you are working for yourself, you could just say, oh, hold down Alt and Option plus Shift, and now they're all going to the stereo output for all the selected tracks. Okay, so it's a question. Hello, I'm on Cubase 10.5 to Pro. I'm having a problem with Reverence. When I open a saved session, the impulse I selected will be gone. It will say impulse not found. I haven't changed the location of my impulses. Okay, so one thing that can help with this, so if you've sometimes, like I just got that message, a friend of mine sent me a project to use for demos. My friend Clay Oswald is incredibly talented, just has the best projects. And his Reverence just had so we'll just open up an instance of Reverence here. And he sent me a project where it had another impulse that he had loaded, and not Revelation, but we'll add Reverence this time. Sorry for operator error on my part. So what these are WAV files. Those impulses are WAV files, and they'll just kind of show up here. And if you wanted to import a different WAV file, you could do that directly from the system. If you're getting kind of the message and you're using kind of just the basic impulses and the IRs, the impulse responses that come with the program, it could be indicative that maybe going into your media bay could do the trick. So if you come to VST Sound, you'll probably see or maybe under factory content, and we go to VST3 presets. Look at Steinberg to Reverence. So try to just right click there and click on rescan disk. And there's a good chance that that will kind of refresh it and relink the association to that particular project. But and if that doesn't help, make sure that it is one of the factory impulse responses, because a lot of times you could download impulse responses and load them up, but you may have to save it as a preset within the plugin for it to be, sometimes maybe for it to be recalled correctly. So I would, come over here once you have that, is just kind of click and save a preset once you have it, and see if that could also kind of link it as well. Just saying, a comment from Atlantis, the multi-delay, probably the multi-tap delay is a powerful plugin. Don't forget to use that, guys. It's probably the most like over the top and in a very complimentary way, the most German delay plugin I've ever seen, where it's just everything, what if you want to do this and this and this and this and have different reverb on each tap? It's incredibly flexible. Okay, so we see Stefan checking in from Sweden. Good to have you on a hangout. Okay, question. How can I put, excuse me, how can I place an insert effect pre and post in the internal channel strip, not pre and post fader? So can I place an insert effect pre and post the internal channel strip? All right, so if you have the channel strip open, so, you could take the, change the signal flow order if you wanted the inserts to come before the channel strip or the channel strip to come before the inserts. So it's all inserts before the channel strip or the whole channel strip before the inserts. But it's something that's not so obvious. So when you see this, when we kind of see it labeled here, this is basically the signal flow. But clicking, if you just go to the left here and click, you can change the signal flow order between those two so that the channel strip can come before the inserts or the inserts can come before the channel strip. So you just kind of click on those two icons there and you can pick which one comes first. So I think that should be able to help you out with that diminished. All right. Okay, so I'm being referred to as La Leche again by Michael and Pablo. I'm told it's a term of respect, but my high school Spanish, which is all, which admittedly was a long time ago, just reminds me that it's the milk. So. Okay. Okay, so question, Greg. Please, can you explain the green line post on the mix console? I was told to insert my limiter Pro L on a post slot. Is that accurate? How to assign that green line? So when we see, this green line on inserts, we used to have kind of, in previous versions, I think up to 9. We could have 8 insert slots, and the bottom 2 were set for post fader. So above the green line is pre fader, and below the green line is post fader. So generally, if you're running limiter, that's going to be used in post fader. So the green line. So if I come here and we'll just open up, let's say a limiter or a maximizer type plugin, Dynamics. So let's say, okay, I go to my limiter plugin, and we see it's orange. That indicates that insert is post fader. So each channel, you could have, this number of post fader inserts, but if I go to, let's say, a different channel, we could have every channel can have independent number of pre and post fader inserts. So it's really just, depends on whatever you need for that particular channel. So you could just kind of move the mouse, and we see the green line that divides the pre and post becomes illuminated. Just hold down the left mouse button and move that up and down, and you could allocate which slots are pre and post fader. Okay, so you see diminished, the stacked recording is what he was looking for with the MIDI record mode, so glad that was helpful. All right, so question from Daniel Isaacson. Can I run Cubase without the USB dongle? I have only 2 USB sockets on my Mac. So if you have Cubase Artist or Cubase Pro, it's going to require the USB e-licenser to be connected. I use in the United States, we have, I'm not sure where you're based, but in the US, we have just a generic store, like an electronic store called Best Buy. I think they're in Canada as well. And with Best Buy, I just went and got a unpowered, the USB e-licensers require very little power. So I run mine just on an unpowered hub. And I think, I spent $7 on it. You can get an Amazon Basics USB hub and just connect it into the hub. And that will give you, more options to run USB devices. So if you have like a controller keyboard, maybe a wireless mouse that isn't Bluetooth, other USB things, it's a good, simple, easy investment to buy an unpowered, simple hub. I always get one where the cable that connects to the USB port is connected to the USB hub, so I don't lose a cable, because pre-COVID-19, I would basically I was a guy that was on planes, I think last year in 2019, I had, 123 flights. So I was constantly traveling. So that way I wouldn't have to worry about losing, the little cable that connects the hub to the computer. So I just bought a simple USB hub with the attached cable, and I've had kind of the same one for 12 or 14 years or so without any problems. Okay, question. How we can use simultaneously 2 or more USB interfaces in Cubase. The problem with doing, multiple audio interfaces is their internal resolution is going to be sample accurate. And in Cubase, that could be up to 1/192,000th of a second. If these 2 interfaces don't really have a way of synchronizing accurately between themselves, at that point, using multiple interfaces, audio could be sent out of one interface or being captured or ingested in another interface, but out of sync with the other interface. So most times when we have USB interfaces, you don't have the option of kind of stacking them. Especially on Windows platform. Now, some people can, as a workaround in a pinch, if you need it on Windows, you could, some people will use like an ASIO for all driver, which is kind of a generic sound card audio interface driver, and you could run multiple interfaces that way, but it's not, everyone I know has tried it for like a serious thing is just like, it's not worth it. Just get an audio interface that has the right number of inputs and outputs. On Mac OS, you could do what's called within the core audio system under the audio MIDI setup utility. You could set up for it to be an aggregate device. So you could have multiple interfaces, but the drawback is that it compounds the latency. So if you had 3 interfaces, and they each had a latency of, let's say 12 milliseconds, your latency is now 36 milliseconds. So it gets to be, a bit impractical to do that as well. So So that's kind of some of the reasoning why it seems like a really simple thing. It's like, oh, I could have two mice connected. It's not a problem, but with audio interfaces, having that real time, proper, accurate synchronization is really critical because Cubase needs to know when to send the audio out and to make sure that that's going to be, in time. Okay. Okay, we have a question about MIDI. As I'm not at my Cubase right now, is there a way to split MIDI notes in new parts? Is there a way, meaning creating new tracks of each note value is working mostly with audio recently? So let's say if I have a MIDI part here, and so I have like 5 different notes in there. So what you could do is select the MIDI event, go to your MIDI menu, and there's a function for dissolve part. And at this point, we could choose to separate by pitches. So you could do this by channels, like if you have a standard MIDI file where it's all in one part with multiple MIDI channels, you could separate by channels. But here we could choose under MIDI to dissolve part, separate pitches, hit OK, and now each of these will automatically, each pitch, and you'll see the pitch indicated here will automatically be put into its own track. So this is like really great for doing drum stuff. So once again, MIDI to dissolve part. Okay. Right, and grab the right mouse. That would be helpful. Okay, so question, you did this before. Would you review best practice for setting streaming volume in Wavelab? So I'm not sure if this is, within Wavelab, you could, we'll just open it up quickly. So it could really depend upon like your actual output source. So if we have Wavelab, for streaming, like I think Spotify is, minus 14 LUFS. So I will come over here. Let's just open up an audio file and okay, just find a project here quickly. Okay, so let me just... Okay, so let's say, if I wanted to process this, so when you go to, so you probably want it to be like 14 LUFS. So let's go over here, and I think we could just change the gain. Let me just see if I can... So, at this point, you could just kind of just hit the gain adjustment, and let me see, and there's going to be... So when we come over here also, let's say under process and go to loudness. Here, so go under the process menu and loudness, and we can say, okay, we want it to be minus 14 LUFS, and just hit apply. And that way you could know, if it's that way, you'll know that you're kind of compliant right there. So just go to under process to loudness, and then you could set your loudness units directly there. So for broadcast, it's probably minus 23 LUFS for a lot of streaming services, and these are evolutionary, so they may change over time. But so go to process to loudness, and then you could type in the level, and Wavelab will normalize it for you. And you could also kind of do this now with 10.5 inside of Cubase as well. So if you have a particular audio file, go to audio processes for the benefit of those who want to do it inside of Cubase, and just choose your loudness normalization here. So prior to version 10.5, it was only just in dB, but now you could do loudness units as well. All right, so I'm just seeing Michael, and it's his birthday, so we had to comply with his wish today for wanting people to hit the like button. Okay. Okay, my chat field jumped on me, so I'll just jump back here. Okay, I know we had some questions that were emailed in, but we'll get to those after this question. In a drum map editor, can you select all notes and change these all at once? Let's say set all MIDI channels or clear all default names. So let me just jump over here to this particular part. This is routed to okay, so I'm going to go to the drum map setup, and let's say if I wanted all these, so I'm just going to select all these and switch. Okay, let me see. I think we could do it within. All right, let me just try a couple here. Okay, so if you hold down Control or Command and go to Channel, you could just change one and they will all change. So I open it up and then hold down Control or Command and hit 3, let go, and all of them will change directly there. So if you wanted to clear all the names, so I'm not sure if it would clear the names, but you could probably just have start with a new drum map if you wanted that. So let's say so I don't know a way to clear the names, but let me just I'll try a couple modifier keys and maybe so I don't know a way of clearing all names, but again, it's on a Mac, it's Command, but it's probably Control on Windows, and you could change all the MIDI channels like that. Okay, so I know we had a couple questions that were sent in. All right, and I think I opened up the wrong one, so give me just a second. Okay, so we had someone had asked about working with MIDI Guitar 2 and being able to deal with false triggers that are coming from it, and how to kind of mitigate that. So a lot of times you may have different sensitivities with the, pitch to MIDI conversion. So a lot of times, when Cubase is accepting false triggers from like a MIDI controller, it's because the MIDI controller is spitting them out. So Cubase is, trying to do, to capture all the incoming MIDI data. So the impetus kind of should be on a MIDI controller. But when we work with this, something that you could do is with the input transformer, a lot of false triggers sometimes could, have maybe smaller velocities. So here at this point, we could say we want to filter out events that are equal to note, and we'll say value 2, which is velocity, we could say is less than 50. And at this point, it could, once you turn this on, it could activate and delete notes that have a velocity less than 50. So a lot of times, and I kind of did some quick research on this, and that's what a lot of people seem to be doing. But again, Cubase is capturing what it's actually seeing. Now, I know in other Hangouts, we had a discussion about, if Cubase could delete short notes on input and filter those out. Cubase doesn't, you can't really filter out a note message until you know what the length of it is. So regardless of how fast it is. So if it's going to be a MIDI, a really short note that's kind of like a machine gun of false triggers, or a long note, the note has to be captured for it to do analysis. You could, do that within the MIDI editor, but not necessarily within on a real-time input mode, because once the note is in, you just have to see how long that particular note is. And I think it was 2 Hangouts ago, maybe a week ago, we had a question about, if ASIO guard had makes a difference in the audio quality. And I gotten some files, and I got only 2 of the 5 files to open. So I just did a little test myself to see if that would make a difference. So ASIO guard, which allows you to run kind of different, different latencies, like a multiple latency, so that you could run the tracks that you're actually recording at a lower latency, and other tracks will be run at kind of a higher multiple latency. So what I did is I just wanted to do this with I just did a quick sine wave, and I'll go ahead and I will delete these files here. So I just did, and if everyone wants to turn their volume down a little bit, I'll play just an annoying sine wave here. And this is always kind of an interesting way of testing. So I hit my sine wave. So I just recorded 9 measures of a 1K test tone. So incredibly stable volume. And I just had the volume down to not kill everyone's ears. I'll put that back up to 0 dB. So what I want to do is I will come over here to my studio setup. And let's go to our audio system and we will choose to let's see if we're going to choose not to have ASIO guard activated. Okay, so I'm going to bypass that and hit OK. And what I'm going to do is export this particular file. So I'll choose an audio mixdown and we'll say no ASIO guard. Okay, and I will choose to just have our stereo out. So everything's at 0 dB for my master fader, right? And let's export. All right. So here we see our no ASIO guard file. So I'll just delete these tracks. All right, I'm just going to do that export one more time because I had some extra tracks in there. Okay, so ASIO guard still bypassed. I will and for my naming conventions, I'll just okay, so we'll create audio track. So I'll just go ahead and remove these two as well. Okay, so our original file. All right, so that's our no ASIO guard there. So now I'm going to enable ASIO guard. And we will do an export audio mixdown again. We'll call this ASIO guard on. Okay, so what I want to do now is we're going to see if these files, I'm just going to do a quick polarity test and see if they null out, if there's a difference. So I will open up one of the channels and I'll make sure I don't kill you with a sine wave here. Okay, so we see that, and then I'm going to flip the phase. I did this earlier, they nulled out, so I'll just open up the files I generated earlier here. So they should still be in my pool. So I have these two files, and then let's see if I flip the phase on one of the files generated earlier. You see it just cancels out. So when I did it earlier, it seemed like everything was the same between being recorded. But if you could send the files to me again, because I can only get 2 of the files, I could do some more analysis on it. All right, let's jump back to our chat. Thanks for all the wonderful questions. Okay, reading through comments. Okay, let's see how we're doing on time. So we got a couple more minutes. Let's see. Okay, so question from Jeff. Can you explain the main advantages of utilizing a group track versus a folder track? So, they're kind of two separate things. So we could think of a group track as actually combining the sound of the different audio sources so that when we have these different sources here, so if I put these into a group based on this, all of the sound of the audio is going to be sent to this particular group as we do this. A folder track is going to just be a visual organization tool for the main project window. So if I have too many tracks, I can now right click and I'll say move these to a folder track, and I could close and expand or collapse the folder view of all of my tracks. So, but the folder track doesn't have anything to do with audio or changing the sound of the audio. The groups can, sum and alter the sound of the audio, but don't have anything to do with organization. Okay, just reading through comments. Thanks for all the great questions. Okay, so we have waveform modulation is the revelation of the day for Gareth. That's good. So I see a question. Is there any way besides with retrospective record to have the chord track when set to use monitor tracks, ignore a track I'm trying to record into? So let's jump back to one of my other projects. Okay, so let's say I have quick chord track here. Oh, sorry, it's already in there at the top, so I'll just enter some chords in. All right, so I have some chords in there, and let's say I have my electric piano, and I'll just turn this up. So that is set to monitor. So I think if you go to the chord track and go to the inspector and try just turning off the acoustic feedback. And now as I want to record, I will just go to my piano here and let me just see. So now I did that. All right, let's see if I go to a chord track. I've seen some people will just set it to like a different. All right, let's see if I mute the chord track and. All right, so that didn't have anything. So if you just try taking a chord track and just muting it and see if that will do the trick for you. All right, so just saying, didn't know about the stereo enhancer. Thanks, Greg. That's good. That's a great little plugin to work with. Okay, we got just a couple more minutes and we'll have to wrap up. Okay, so it says question, when you move the cycle markers, why do I not see the position while moving as a different color within the track view? Only once I release the new position can I see the shading of the range. So let's say I'll set up a quick cycle marker here. So I guess you want to see it update as it's being moved and not just when it's placed into a new location. So I'm not sure if there's a particular reason for that. So maybe it's visually distracting to someone who does the interface design. Okay, hi Greg. Can I change the range of an instrument in Halion Sonic SE? So I think we're in Halion Sonic SE here. So I'll click. Let me just add one. So all you have to do is when you go to MIDI, you'll see the range here, and you could just choose, so you click in this particular, I'll just load up a quick sound first. And then once you have that sound loaded, you could choose kind of just the particular range. So if you only want it to respond in those particular keys or only within this particular velocity level. So you could come over here also and just say, this only responds to velocities in that particular range and filter out otherwise. So you could do different layers where you say, okay, we'll just take, And at that velocity range, it could just layer here, and these could both be on the same channel. So just click in MIDI and then click on the key range, and you can go right there. So I think we have time for maybe one more quick question. Okay, can you show us how to auto-populate channels by default with certain inserts, like stereo enhancers? So a lot of times people will do that with templates, but if you wanted to add a number, so let's say, I want to take all of these tracks and add a stereo enhancer to all of these plugins here. We'll go to the mix console. So say I go to inserts, I see all these, and I want a stereo enhancer. So again, activate quick link by holding down Alt or Option plus Shift. And now I could just say, let's go to spatial panner, stereo enhancer, and now it's added that plugin on all of the channels for you. Okay, see if we have time for one more quick question before we have to wrap up. If I go beyond 4 hours, then I lose all of the free captioning, and then it makes my night doing the index much longer tonight. So, okay. Okay, so I see John Wells about the impulse responses in Reverence. Sometimes he's using a Bricasti impulse response. So. Okay, so it says, hi, Greg, I missed the dual panner option, which was available in previous versions of Cubase, how to quickly swap left and right channels on a stereo track. So it's still there. So if you go to our stereo track, click just hover over it, and then you'll see a balanced panner, or you want to do a combined panner. So it's slightly a little different, but it gets you kind of to the same area. So if you just do this and you want to swap the left and right, just hold down the mouse and go straight up, and then that will invert the channels for you. So if you want to do kind of like a panning sweep all the way from, across, and then go invert it when you see it turn orangish, then that's really kind of all you have to do. Okay, so with that, we're just about out of time. I want to thank everyone for wonderful questions that you sent in for the Hangout. I hope that everyone has learned a tip or trick. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, make sure you do that. Also, make sure that you hit the like button if you learned something new. We'll be doing the next Hangout this upcoming Friday at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time, so the same time as this Hangout. I hope that everyone stays safe and healthy, and we'll see you on Friday. And you could submit questions in advance to clubcubase@steinberg.de. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful day, and we'll see you on Friday. Goodbye.